Kia ora koutou whānau. It is the 13th of June, the year of our Lord 2022, 10 p.m. in. Good evening to everyone. Good evening, Jeremy.
Good evening, Pat. And hi, George. And I'm whoever the dog is in the corner.
Oh, and Nala. Nala's our co-host.
Nala. Oh, great.
You know when the kids are at their mum's place, because Nala's in the studio. We've learned that over the last few hours. And a big happy birthday to this one. Happy birthday, George. It's George's birthday today.
Man. Oh, congrats.
Yeah. Cheers.
Way for the weekend. Sounds like lots of exciting things happens in George's life. So so there you go. Cool. Jeremy, and welcome back to you. We haven't seen you for a couple of weeks, and one of the reasons was you got the dirty C word for a while. Are you all right?
Yeah, I did. I'm fine. Yeah, no, I did. After dodging it for nearly 3 years. Yeah, managed to pick up the COVID somewhere along the way. And so it took me out of action for about a week. And it really did actually take me out of action. It wasn't, I think I got a pretty mild dose by some of the stories I've heard, but it wiped me out. It's lingered on. I'm normally, if I do get a cold or a flu or something, it normally lasts about 36 hours. And this one was a whole week where I was, certainly by this time of night, I was really not much use to anybody. So, yeah.
So would you say that your experience of what you are describing as a fairly mild case was still very different to like a cold or a flu?
Symptoms were, for me, and I'm, one of the things that I've become hyper aware of with this is that everyone experiences it very differently. For me, it was like having a very heavy head cold, the foggy headedness, the runny nose. I didn't have much of a cough, anything like that. But it was certainly different in terms of how persistent it was and for how long it lasted. And the fatigue thing was really noticeable. Yeah, just the complete lack of energy. Yeah, I think last time, or maybe one of the recent times I've been on, George, we were talking, you had a really vicious headache. I did get headaches, but nothing massively serious. I had lots of little symptoms which all kind of culminated in being something for a week without one sort of major. There was nothing that really freaked me out.
Have you got your taste?
Yeah, I managed to keep my taste, and I certainly didn't lose my appetite, which is kind of unfortunate because I was at home. I was at home doing nothing except basically eating. And now the weather's gone to hell up here in Auckland, so I haven't been outside. I still really haven't been outside for 2 weeks. So yeah.
Have you got yours back yet, George? Your taste?
No, I think it's still a bit weird and off. I don't know. Really? Maybe I'm just imagining that, or maybe it's just going to be like that forever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, tonight on the show, we've got a couple of guests coming up. We're going to be catching up with regular and friend of the show, Byron C Clark, shortly, a disinformation researcher. We want to talk January 6th committee. I know it happened sort of on Friday our time, but Friday we did a special here in Big Hairy News where we had a bit of a debate going on with an American conservative commentator, so we didn't touch on it then. So we thought we'd touch on it tonight, and I know that I saw a tweet from Byron saying he was taking the afternoon off to watch the committees. I didn't take it off, I had it off, and I watched the committees as well. It was essential viewing, actually. It was quite amazing what came out, and you can see why Fox News didn't carry it. Let me just put it that way. Also later on this hour, kind of as a flow on from that conversation a little bit, because I guess that's talking a bit about the alt-right and what's happening in America. We're having Dr Suze Wilson coming on. Dr Wilson is in the School of Management at Massey University. Let me read for you her sort of area of study. My doctoral research examined why and how it became normalized in recent decades to equate leadership with grandiose expectations of transformation, vision, and charisma. She wrote a piece a couple of months ago talking about from pretty communist to Jacinda, what's behind the vitriol directed at Jacinda Ardern. And the reason I thought that could flow on is in the weekend just gone, we hear that there has been a 300% increase in death threats to the Prime Minister, a lot of them coming from that sort of alt-right, anti-vaxxer, anti-mandate crew. So it kind of felt like it flowed on. And although Suze wrote that article a couple of months ago, it feels like it would still be an appropriate thing to talk about and to tie it back into our conversation we're going to have with Byron as well. We might, if we have time, have a look at the cabinet reshuffle. And we do want to touch again on Louise Wallace, because we talked about that Wednesday night after it happened. And then the weekend it all blew up with Dame Valerie Adams sending out a Instagram message about giving Louise Wallace an uppercut. Now, I don't want to see that literally happen to Louise Wallace, but when I close my eyes, you can see that shot putter, and that it would be, I'm not saying I'd like to see her actually do it, but the image of it is quite a fascinating image.
Well, I'll just point out, Pat, I think Dame Valerie actually said that Louise should give herself an uppercut, which is even better in my book.
No, true.
I think that's great. I think that's great. It's like Valerie Adams doesn't really even want to risk damaging her hands. You just do it yourself. I can't be bothered. Yeah.
Now, a reminder, if you're watching, you can join on any of the conversations. There's no pre-records tonight, so everything's live. Whatever platform you're watching on, just mention it in the comments. And of course, as we always say, if you're watching on YouTube, the super chats are open. Amen. All right, let's get into it, shall we? Byron C Clark is a disinformation and misinformation researcher who had a great afternoon on Friday watching the January 6th committees. I'm sure. Did you watch them with a beer, Byron, with a notepad? How did you ingest that information?
I watched them. The idea was to have it on in the background. I'd taken the afternoon off to do some writing for the book I'm working on, but then started that and suddenly saw that they were about to go live with this hearing, and it didn't really end up being background viewing because it was quite compelling. So yeah. So for people who didn't see it, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have seen highlights on the news, but like the first hour and a half, they just basically set the case, and it was like, holy crap, all this footage that hadn't been seen before and all these statements that hadn't been seen. And all of a sudden someone would pop up on the screen, like literally Ivanka Trump. And I think we've got some of that footage as well, with her saying, yes, I believe William Barr that my father did lose the election. And just point after point after point. As I said a few minutes ago, you can see why Fox News did not want to carry it, especially when there was Hannity text messages also coming up in the I guess evidence, the opening statement, whatever you'd call it, from the January 6th committee. What did you get out of watching it, Byron? I felt it was really making the case that Trump had encouraged this. Trump is the reason this happened, and I think he's going to be really arguing that that he just gave a speech and didn't actually say go and try and overthrow democracy. But you look at what he was doing and claiming the election was stolen, this whole stop the steal thing. And I think if you've got somebody who is your leader, your president who you've elected, who is making these speeches saying the election was stolen, I'm the rightful president, you would then believe that stopping the transition of power was a morally justified thing to do. Yeah. And I'll be watching closely to see what the consequences are for Donald Trump, whether there are any consequences or whether he'll have another tilt at the presidency in 2024 and what that might look like.
I mean, I watched bits and pieces of it, and for a start, I just thought the production values were incredible. The whole thing was put together like a Hollywood legal thriller, and got the ratings to go with it. They had 19 million people watching that first hour, which is actually really encouraging in a way. But Byron, you might be able to answer this, or you might not. Can this committee actually do anything, or is this the committee that is going to lead to people deciding whether they're going to indict him on criminal? He could be indicted on federal criminal charges. That's kind of like the ultimate end game, right?
Yeah, well, I haven't been following the legal sides of it too closely, right. But I think it'll move slowly, whatever happens. And this is just
of course.
Early stages of it.
This is just the show. Yeah, great. Yeah.
Maybe one of the big questions also is, not even necessarily around the legalities, what will happen to Trump, is will it make any difference, for example, in the midterms? What do people think? Because I don't know. I know, look, I spoke to sort of a conservative right-winger on Friday night for 2 hours and 40 minutes we talked. and you can just see how much brainwashing there is in there. And no matter what you put before people or what you say, they still come back to the conclusion that they want anyway. What I was going to get to is, if I was a Republican voter in America, I would want to see this. But are the Fox viewers going to see this, or are they going to believe? Because Tucker Carlson said literally on his show that they ran ad-free on the night. They ran them ad-free to make sure no one had a chance to flick over. That's why they did it, because we flick in the ads, you see. So they made them ad-free, and then no one flicked off. He said, they are lying to you. That's literally what Tucker Carlson said on the night that these things were happening. So what do you guys think? Will it make any difference at all?
Yeah, I mean, the whole Tucker Carlson thing has really shown, it's just really further emphasised that we're living in this post-truth age now, and there's a section of the Republican Party in the US behind Donald Trump who still believe the election was stolen. Many of them believe that the January 6th insurrection was some sort of false flag, or it was Antifa infiltrators, or whatever. And I don't think that even if they were to watch this whole hearing, that would sway them. I guess in terms of how it could impact the midterms, it will come down to that more moderate wing of the Republican Party, whether they are still going to be prepared to look the other way on their more extreme wing, or whether it's going to be a case of them actually, challenging that and saying, we don't want to be the Trumpist Republican Party. We want to be, something more like, more of a moderate centre-right party.
More of the Mitt Romney party.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
I think I'd agree with you. I mean, I think the midterm elections they're like elections basically anywhere right at the moment, which are, both sides have a hardcore who aren't going to budge regardless of what they see. It's that middle ground that you're chasing. And unfortunately in the US, I mean, the numbers have shown in the last couple of elections, the way the middle ground have often responded to things like this is just not turn up to vote. So if it does have an effect on the midterm, if it motivates even a small proportion of those middle ground people to decide that their vote counts, then that could well be a positive thing in itself. But no, Byron, like you say, I think it's going forward. It'll be interesting to see how it affects the Trumpists' hold on the Republican Party, because right at the moment he is very much, maybe not in name, but certainly in personality and in policy, the leader of that party. And, if this encourages, as you say, some of those more moderate voters who do exist, by the way. I know we spend a lot of time bashing the Republicans on this show, and I do in my everyday life as well. But there are moderate Republicans out there. They really have been and they love using, Republicans love using this phrase, but they have been the silent majority in that party. So with a bit of luck, this might get a few more of them to speak out. Only time will tell.
Well, I think the other thing is, we're talking about those moderates in the Republican Party, is often those people may also be sort of singular issue voters as well. And whilst they look at someone like Trump and they kind of roll their eyes and they go, oh God, he doesn't represent us, they go Roe versus Wade. They go, anti-abortion. They go, my gun's freedom. And even though they might think that he is a bit of a tool, they go, he's the one, even though he's a tool, that's going to, or whoever the Republican is, who's going to get through my one or two things that I agree with, even though the other 20 things that he stands for I don't. And they don't seem to be able to, it's funny, especially that part of politics which is, invokes the word Christian and invokes the word conservative, but when it comes to moral choices, they seem to be able to put their morality to the side very easily if they can get through their guns and their, pro-life agenda sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, again, I mean, I would argue that I think, again, those people probably won't change their mind. They're probably part of that hardcore that I'm talking about. What I'm talking about are people who vote Republican for the same reasons that people vote National here or vote Tory in the UK. They think they're better for the economy. They, whether rightfully or wrongfully, they see them as the party of the economy, the party of strength, of economic strength, military strength, whatever you like, going forward. And, you know, some of them are turned off by any of those issues that you just mentioned, but particularly by Trump. But they have been drowned out recently. They've been completely drowned out by the people who have latched onto Trump's entire agenda, or even just the small parts of it, such as immigration, foreign relations, you know, those things. So that's who I'm talking about when I'm talking about moderate Republicans. Kind of run-of-the-mill center-right voters, you know, the kind of
normal
person
people.
who normal people who lean slightly to the right from me. Yeah.
Hey, Byron, I'd like to ask you a little bit about what we're going to talk about later on today, but
Sure.
George has got a few clips queued up. George, do you want to come back in? Because you can set them up for us and tell us what we're looking at as well.
Yeah, so this one sort of is a reflection of what you're talking about before, with basically people turning up because they personally felt that Trump was telling them to turn up.
Now we're going to hear it from the rioters themselves. Without objection, I include in the record a video presentation.
What really made me want to come was the fact that, you know, I had supported Trump all that time. I did believe, you know, that the election was being stolen. And Trump asked us to come.
He personally asked for us to come to D.C. that day. And I thought, for everything he's done for us, if this is the only thing he's going to ask of me, I'll do it.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
Did you recall President Trump mentioning going to the Capitol during his speech?
Oh, yeah. So that's one of my disappointments. He said he was going to go with us, that he was going to be there.
I know why I was there, and that's because he called me there, and he laid out what is happening in our government.
Wow.
He laid it out.
But I remember Donald Trump telling people to be there, right? I mean, to support.
So you mentioned that the president asked you. Do you remember a specific message?
Basically, yeah, he asked for us to come to D.C., that big things are going to happen.
What got me interested, he said, I have something very important to say on January 6th or something like that, is what got me interested to be there.
You know, Trump has only asked me for two things. He asked me for my vote, and he asked me to come on January 6th.
Just on that video, though, I mean, like, I think we all kind of know that there was some subtext here to what Trump was saying, but I don't think he can be held accountable for what happened at the actual building because of what he has said. I mean, they all said, come to the Capitol, come to DC, but to then make that leap, and I'm not saying he wasn't stoked with what was going on. Obviously, as part of that January 6th committee, it came out that he was watching TV and, you know, eating popcorn basically. But I'm just thinking in a setting where they need to prove it, I think it's going to be a long bow to prove that he's culpable for them entering the building, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think certainly from that legal standpoint, he's got plausible deniability there. He can say, like, he can continue to say he believes the election was fraudulent, but he can say, look, we were wanting to have a peaceful demonstration. I never asked them to, you know, breach the building and so on. I mean, unless we get some evidence out that shows that he was encouraging that, or that he was working with some of these militia groups like the Proud Boys, which we probably won't see that because they are pretty distant from him. Really, I don't think any of these groups had a direct line to Trump, but that, you know, they were encouraged by him, but probably weren't collaborating with him. So if there are any legal consequences for Trump, it'll probably be more around his antics in terms of trying to get votes recounted and anything that went along with that, rather than the actual events of the day that the transition of power was going to happen.
Yeah,
there is a certain legal precedent in U.S. law. I mean, it's the old line, but it's actually entrenched in law. It's the idea of yelling fire in a crowded theater, whereas your actions can be judged if depending on, you know, what you reasonably thought would happen. And, you know, if they could prove that he asked all these people to come to DC and his rhetoric, if they could somehow prove that, you know, well, what did you reasonably think that was going to happen? But again, it's a very difficult thing, firstly for that, but also opening up this legal precedent that if you do indict a president, even an ex-president, which has never happened, criminally indict rather than impeach, it does open this door for a tit-for-tat thing where suddenly, every party for the next 20 years is going to be trying to indict the other person's president, which is, I think, something that they're very wary of. That politics are certainly not going away just because this is a criminal and/or congressional hearing.
The difference will be in that, though, is if he gets held up on some criminal charge, that's a very different. You can't really tit for tat in criminal charges. You can on the indictment, political kind of tomfoolery, but if it was to be criminal, but Carl kind of says something what you were just saying about as well, is there will be no consequences for Donald Trump. It would go against their unspoken policy of not prosecuting previous administrations. That's a history of Contras, WMDs, etc., etc. So that's sort of that idea.
It's a very fair point. Yeah.
Nixon did crimes, and they sort of brushed that aside and sort of for the greater good, I guess.
Well, he resigned before he could be criminal indicted, and then he got pardoned. Yeah, Gerald Ford pardoned.
Yeah, the pardon.
The way it was weird.
Have we got some more, a couple more short videos there or something, George? We just rip through them.
Yep. All right. We have. This was the Ivanka one. This is Ivanka talking about her conversations with Barr.
How did that affect your perspective about the election when Attorney General Barr made that statement?
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
Okay. So and then basically a post here from her father sort of saying, she wasn't across this stuff. Right? She wasn't across conversations with Bill Barr.
Senior advisor at the White House wasn't across this stuff.
Yeah.
could be a problem in itself, but yeah.
The other video was from Liz Cheney. I don't know if we read. It's sort of the polemics at the end of her.
How long is it?
Her speech, 2 minutes.
Nah,
or 3 minutes.
She basically.
I do wonder if basically, aside from the legal issues here, it's basically a Republican Party sort of reconfiguring itself in a post-Trump sort of era, right? You have the sort of Liz Cheneys who are seen as the sensible Republicans, even though they're far from it, sort of trying to take the reins. But I think they'll find that there's still a sort of very popular sentiment in the Republican Party, and that people like her maybe will not be around in Congress for long.
Is it a post-Trump era though? I mean,
no, but they want to make it that. People like Cheney do. Yeah. They want the old moderate Republican Party.
Yeah. And that'll be the thing, is depending what happens at the midterms and depending what happens at the next election, if they can get away from Trump, then all these people who are current Trump supporters will just swing back to whoever the moderate is, and they'll appear more moderate.
I sort of take that back. Maybe they don't want a post-Trump. Maybe because she was happy, well, for the most part, while Trump was there. The tax cuts come through. They can sort of, guide foreign policy here and there when Trump's in power, or someone like Trump's in power. I mean, it's a balance, I guess.
Let's ask Byron this as well, so we don't call him all night, keep him here all night. This is a conversation we're going to be talking on later tonight, Byron. It's a new story from the weekend. Threats against the Prime Minister triple, according to report. This is threats against Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern have tripled over the last 3 years. News Hub, citing information released under the OIO, reports that threats for Ardern have tripled, yada yada. It's understood that anti-COVID-19 vaccination sentiment for contributing factor, along with opposition to the government's firearms crackdown after March 15 terror attacks in Christchurch. So it's that same sector of society that we're kind of seeing the New Zealand version of the ones that are storming the building over in the US, that they seem to be holding accountable for these death threats against the PM. You're a disinformation researcher. You've been looking especially around those Wellington protests and stuff. What can you speak to this to let us know about why we're seeing this?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's not surprising to see those numbers going up. I mean, 2019, 2020, 2021. You look at what's happened over those years with the Christchurch shooting, and then the firearms buyback, and then the whole pandemic and all the conspiracy theories around vaccines and everything. and all the sort of adjacent stuff to that about Ardern being a puppet of the UN or the World Economic Forum, all these ridiculous things that make their way around dark corners of the internet that are, have more people than we'd like to think. It's really similar to like I was saying about Trump before. I mean, if you really believe in your leaders telling you the election was rigged and the true democratic leader is Trump, you're going to believe you're morally justified to try and stop the transfer of power. And these people here really believe that Ardern is 1 minute away from declaring herself a dictator, or that she is facilitating genocide through the COVID vaccine. If you really believe that, you might start to think that you're some sort of a freedom fighter in a socialist tyranny or whatever. And so to see these escalating threats is, it makes sense within the logic of that conspiracy theorist mindset.
This was a hand delivered to a bunch of houses. I can't remember which town it was, but it was a small town in New Zealand beginning with H. I was going to say Hokianga. I don't want to paint them in a bad brush, but it was delivered to a bunch of houses in a small town. And for those who are listening, it's a handwritten note that says, very soon a group of us are going to eradicate Jacinda Ardern from this earth plane for good. She is killing our people and our means to live a fair, happy, normal life. She is done. Bye-bye, Jacinda, very soon. So there's a pretty horrifically graphic example of what some, whether it's 100 or 1,000 people, think is the solution to what's going on at the moment. All right. Hey, Byron, thanks for joining us tonight. As always, it's been a great pleasure to have you on board. Are you going to, have you got, like, they call it TiVo in America, have you got Mice Guide, the rest of the January 6th committee? Are you going to be catching up on it and watching it each time?
Yeah, I'm going to, when I find the time, we'll be watching the rest of it there.
All right. Hey, dude, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Great, thank you.
All right, Byron C Clark, their disinformation researcher. Want to say as well, very quickly, a huge thank you to Simple Reality. I know it's been there for a while. Simple, we didn't miss you, we didn't forget you, but it didn't quite seem to be appropriate to bring that up in the middle of the last conversation. So we're giving you your own block, all for you. Thanks for Friday night. Friday night we had a bit of a debate and a conversation going on with a right-wing conservative punter from America. Thanks for Friday night, says Simple. It clearly showed his lack of awareness around his bigoted, racist and misogynistic views. I feel he needs to travel to help to burst his bubble to gain perspective. So thank you for the super chat there, Simple. We genuinely appreciate that. And thank you for, I don't know, helping us keep the lights on. Is that what we say? Something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I'm quite looking forward to speaking to Dr. Suze Wilson closer to 11 o'clock, and she'll bring a perspective of what is leadership to this conversation and why Jacinda seems to be getting the rougher end of the stick, and she's written about this, than if she was a male leader. So we'll have a look at that as well. Let's have a look at our old friend from last week, Louise Wallace, shall we? Because we had a bit of a conversation around Louise Wallace last week, and she was making some comments within the AM show. So she was talking on the AM show about, people who were obese, fatties, fat people, and I'm allowed to use that word. It's like any black person using the N word, so I can say that. And she basically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, George, because I don't want to be unfair, although I'm happy to be a little bit mean. She was basically saying that seeing fat people on billboards is a bad thing because it normalizes being overweight. And being overweight is not normal. And the conversation we had about it last Wednesday night was, if it's not normal, and she used the word it's wrong, that means it's if it's not normal, it's abnormal. If it's not good, it's bad. And so she was using all the superlatives by not literally saying fatties are bad, we don't want them around, but that was the subtext, to me at least, and to both of us who were here. Chewy was here as well, and George, the kind of vibe behind what she was saying. Well, we did that on Wednesday night. We had an interesting conversation with it, and then I wake up on Saturday morning, and Dame Valerie Adams has picked up on the story. And Dame Valerie Adams put out on the left of the screen, if you're watching, this message on Instagram, saying this. So size 12 is normal, but size 18 is not. Uppercut yourself, because what you're saying is disgusting. So many young girls out there have body image issues already, and you come out saying this BS. I'm a size 18 to 20, depending on what it is there for. What it is. Oh, I guess that means what clothing it is, what cut it is. Therefore, I should tape over my mouth. You need to get educated on the human body and realize the amount of damage you're doing by making these comments on national television. So Louise Wallace then also posted that comment on her own Instagram and basically missed the boat altogether, right? She says, as a social commentator, I was asked my opinion about an appalling stats on obesity, and I gave it. I'm not a dietitian, personal trainer, nutritionist, or medical profession, nor do I profess to be. I could have lied and said that they were just something we would have to live with in the 21st century, or I could have said how I felt. I chose the latter. So, you know, I felt disgusted. I chose to tell everyone I felt disgusted. Ipso facto, you're disgusting. So anyway, I kind of wanted to reflect on this for one reason. And Jeremy, I'm really glad you're with us because I want to talk to you guys and to people who are watching as well, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I want to talk about these panels that all the media outlets have, because I had a look at who Louise Wallace is, and I remember her from being on television and being a journalist, and I thought, this is a really strange perspective coming from someone whose job it was to kind of dig into the news and find out what's going on. Well, that was 25 years ago. Since then, she's done things like Celebrity Treasure Island, The Apprentice, Real Housewives, Family Feud. And I just thought, and this is kind of a comment maybe aimed at TV3, who the fuck is she to be offering social commentary on significant and serious health issues that don't impact her? Now, when I say who the fuck is she, I'm like, anyone is entitled to their own opinion, but for a TV network to put someone in front of the camera that's going to be seen by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people with an opinion, what responsibility does that network have, be it radio, television, be it an opinion piece, an op-ed, to actually getting qualified people, or at least informed people, to talk about it, rather than people who drink Chardonnay at 11 in the morning? Jeremy?
It's a very good question. And the simple answer is the reason they do it is because we're still having a conversation about it a week later. That's why they do it. You know, it's that term social commentator. It's a term I've used about myself. It's a term that I have had said about myself. You know, I've been a social commentator. I've been on many of these panel shows that you're talking about. I've worked on many of these panel shows that you've talked about. And unfortunately, even the best news networks everywhere in the world are still, I mean, they still have to answer to the advertisers and to the clicks, you know, and so having somebody on who has an opinion, the more outrageous the opinion, the better in some ways. If you look at the history of you know, the AM show, for example, I mean, they've thrived on that. That's what they've done since their inception. What right does she have to be on there? Well, you know, as much or as little right as I do, for example, or as someone like Mark Richardson, you know, he's a professional cricketer and you know, hosting The Block, and then he was on the AM show for what, 4 years? And I actually personally really like Mark and think he's actually a very good person to have there. So yeah, whilst I absolutely fundamentally agree with you and had exactly the same question as soon as I read it, it was the same thing that popped into my head. Who the fuck is she to say this? Unfortunately, she's a panelist on one of these panel shows, and that's the nature of them.
Yeah, but look, I will disagree with you in one area, right? When I say who the fuck is she to say that, I don't mean like she doesn't have the right to have an opinion, because I don't agree with that.
No.
Someone like yourself, and even Mark Richardson now, because he's involved in the media around news on a daily basis.
Okay.
I mean, me and George were saying this before we went live. We were like, well, who are we to commentate? And it's like, well, actually, we dig down into these things. We find the information. We look around. We're surrounded by it. We consume it. We take on board other opinion, and then we offer one. And so the reason I say she's not the same as you, Jeremy, is I know you, and I know what, like, for example, a political animal you are and how you look at things and read things, and you're informed. Because like what RNZ does, for example, I know that's been a place you've been and your partner's been, is I've looked at their list of commentators, and yeah, there might be comedians there, or there might be entertainers there, or there might be musicians there, but all the people that they have done, it would appear to be, have done the mihi to actually have some credentials and to be able to speak to an issue. They're not just someone who's come off the set of Real Housewives, turned up with no research, no opinion other than, I don't like fat people. You know what I mean? So I think there is, I'm not saying that they all have to be commentators and journalists and academics to be commentators, to be on these things, but I am saying the responsibility to have quality people with quality opinions on, because that services the community better. Look, and I'm holding TV3 pretty heavily accountable for this as well, because they then chose to take that car wreck, cut it into a clip, put it onto their website as a clip, promote that clip, and then when it blew up in their face, there was all, we should have pushed back more, we should have done more. Like they, in my opinion, they probably shouldn't have had her there as a commentator to start with if they believed in a half-pie decent product. I agree with you, Jeremy. She has the right to be there. They have the right to make that decision. But what I'm saying is it feels like it's pitching to the lowest common denominator, and it's not good. It's not good quality content for the community. Do you know what I mean?
I do, and I agree with you. But unfortunately, pitching to the lowest common denominator has made a lot of people an awful lot of money over the years. Not a lot of people have gone broke pitching to the lowest common denominator. The interesting thing, I mean, you talk about the pushback and following it up by promoting it. I mean, all of that is standard operating procedure this day. You get something, you get a real gotcha moment one way or another. It's great. It's a great headline the next day. The interesting thing for the pushback will be to see if and when they have her back.
Yeah, I don't think she'll be back. I mean, I haven't quite said that because I don't believe in cancel culture, but I reckon I don't reckon they'll have her back. I mean, if you were a programmer there.
It's not actually a case of cancel culture, as far as I'm concerned, because you can very easily justify not having somebody back because they weren't very good on something. That's not cancel culture. And I mean, she was so far off base with this and the pushback on it. I mean, in some ways, silver lining, it has put this debate in people's minds again, which, it's something that might have got lost a little bit over the last couple of years with everything else that's been going on. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you don't cancel her because of that. That's not canceling. It's just going exactly like you say. It's like, okay, no, what we want to have here is people with informed opinions that can be backed up, and they can be. I mean, they have to be on both sides of any debate. I mean, that's what balance is, right? Otherwise, you are heading down Fox News or MSNBC territory where you're just hearing one side of an argument. But this is not a case of that. This is a case of a personal opinion that is just so unbelievably stupid that it has no place being on TV. I'm just trying to couch the fact that I'm not even playing devil's advocate here. I'm sort of explaining a little bit about the process of how someone like that is on TV.
Yeah, I get it.
I'm absolutely in no way trying to justify her opinion. So yeah, that will be interesting to see, because in some ways, there will be voices going, "Oh, she's great. She gets people watching. She gets people clicking. Gets people talking about the program," and being talked about for a current events show that's the holy grail. And then want to be talked about.
And then there's also that part which we talked about last week a little bit about representation. I mean, could you imagine having a conversation around women's health amongst all men, or about LGBT issues with all straight people? But they're happy to talk about us fatties with a bunch of non-fatties on there telling us what we shouldn't and shouldn't be. It's like you can't have it both ways. You either have representation or you don't.
I didn't see the show, so I don't know what the lead-in was. I have no idea whether this came out of nowhere or whether it was if it was on their timeline for the day, because you say that people go in unprepared no, they do have actually time. It's like me coming on this show. I have a ballpark idea of the topics we're going to talk about today. Yep. And actually the three of us have been sitting here in the past, and something along the lines of, women's reproductive rights or something has come up, and the three of us with our facial hair have kind of looked at each other and gone, we might leave this till Monday when Danny's on or
when
whatever.
Petey's back.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know the context of that. But yes, I agree with if that was something that they had on the agenda, and if they didn't have an out of studio guest or a pre-record to balance that out, then that's actually a much bigger problem as far as I'm concerned.
Well, this is why Em is saying this. She's saying, and this is why many people are tuning into you guys for information rather than watching mainstream BS. Hey, George, I know me and Jeremy have used up all of that. We're about to go to our to Dr. Suze Wilson and have a chat about that. Do you want to chime in with anything before we shoot off?
You're all right, Pat.
You're all right. You're all right, mate.
Yeah.
It's just, George is like our farmer. You're like, how you going? Oh, it's good, folks. Yep, nah, she's right.
And can I just respond? I didn't catch that last commentator's name. Thank you very much. That's very complimentary, but you have no idea how desperate we would like to be mainstream. But anyway, carry on.
All right. Okay. Let's switch angles slightly. We talked earlier today in this show, I should say. Oh, look, before I do this, let me just do a little advert, and I'm going to put the banner back up. We're now an audio podcast as well. We only started this in the weekend. So if you go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you look up BHN or Big Hairy News, you will find us. I set it all up in the weekend, and I put the 3 specials episodes up there. So there's the episode with Hohepa Thompson talking about Hori's Pledge. There's the episode with Dr. Anna Brooks where we did all COVID for an hour and 20. And there's the episode from Friday night where it wasn't a debate, but it was a conversation with a right winger that I'm already getting comments from people saying things like having so much fun in the live chat with Hakes fanboys until my bloody internet went out due to a storm. So people enjoyed that on Friday night. So those 3 episodes were there so I could set all the RSS feeds up. And from now on, what's going to happen is at the very end of the show, we will get off and I will download the audio, put it straight up onto the podcast, and it'll be sitting there in the morning if people want to pick up on it and listen to us as they're driving to work. So we're an audio podcast from now on as well, starting on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Just thought we'd get that out there. All right, let's talk to Dr. Suze Wilson. Let's just bring Suze in. Dr. Suze Wilson, good evening here in New Zealand. Thank you for joining us.
No worries. Good to meet you.
Suze is in Australia right now, Jeremy. So she said she'd be happy to pick the late shift because it's not the late shift for her, just the late shift for us. And the reason we wanted to bring you in, Dr. Wilson, was to talk a little bit about an article that you originally, I think, wrote for The Conversation. From Pretty Communist to Jacinda, what's behind the vitriol directed at Jacinda Ardern? The reason we want to talk about this, as we've already kind of mentioned tonight, is that the death threats against the Prime Minister have gone up 3-fold in the last 3 years. People are pointing towards COVID-19 vaccinations being a large contributing factor, along with opposition to the government's firearms crackdown after the March 15, 2019 terror attacks. Your article quite brilliantly talks about leadership and what it is and what Jacinda is as a leader. So maybe the first thing I could just do is just give you an opportunity to give you the floor and see if you want to open up this conversation with why does it seem that Jacinda is getting so much pushback, and as your article states, maybe more so than if it was a male Prime Minister?
Oh, thanks for that. A famous leadership scholar from Harvard, Ron Heifetz, argues that leadership is about letting people down at a rate they can handle. So what he's kind of speaking to there is that, leadership is in many ways just impossible. The expectations that are placed on leaders can never be satisfied. And so what Ardern is facing in many ways is an impossible set of expectations that she's tried to, balance and grapple with all, particularly through the pandemic, between those who are persuaded by the science and want a more precautionary approach and those who are like, oh yeah, whatever, let's just focus on making more money and reduce the level of protections and restrictions. And she's tried to grapple her way through that, and in many ways did it brilliantly for much of the pandemic. But as we went into lockdown in August last year, and the researchers from the Disinformation Project have been tracking this intensively, the level of consumption of misinformation and disinformation kind of went through the roof. And so more and more people started buying into these kind of conspiratorialist worldviews, which fundamentally changes how they then perceive the Prime Minister. So they start to perceive her as an agent of evil, as part of the kind of the narrative of the conspiracy that they're caught up in. And so they don't believe anything she says. They think she has bad intent, and they get very riled up. But a particular feature of kind of conspiratorial narratives is that they are often extremely sexist and misogynistic, and often racist as well. And so she particularly gets targeted by that. And then what you kind of have to layer on top of that is that, generally speaking, people's expectations and their own kind of personal theory of leadership is highly gendered as well. So generally speaking, if you ask people what kind of behaviours or attributes they associate with leadership, you'll find a pretty strong correlation between those ideas and people's ideas of how men should behave.
Right.
So generally speaking, when a woman turns up in a leadership role, she's unusual, and so she gets scrutinised a lot more, with a lot more scepticism and suspicion, and so that's kind of layered on top of things as well. And you see now in the kind of vitriolic attack that Ardern is subjected to, there is such a strongly sexist and misogynistic tenor to it. There's so much focus on her appearance. There's this weird stuff about whether she's even a woman, because conspiratorialists are generally very anti-LGBT and trans community. There's a lot of attention on her family, in a way that, if you go back to, Bill English had 6 kids, it was never an issue. Ron T had kids, it was never an issue. But the fact that she has a child, her child is targeted for criticism. So all of this stuff, people are just much more likely to be suspicious and hostile towards a woman leader. And even, even people who are not caught up in a kind of conspiratorialist perspective, you still hear them saying, I don't want to take my orders from that bloody woman.
Mm.
So there's just this fundamental, how dare a woman give me instructions? And it's like, well, how dare she? Because she's actually the Prime Minister, it's her job. But there is just this fundamental resentment that, she's had to make all these difficult decisions that people object to, and so they find reasons to object to them.
It's an interesting point you raise about that, the correlation between people's ideas of leadership and traits of masculinity. With full disclosure, by the way, I should say that Jacinda Ardern is a personal friend of mine, has been well before she was Prime Minister. And so a lot of this stuff, firstly, really upsets me, but also just flabbergasts me, because what you see is what you get with her. And I think one thing that she has not done is, I should just rephrase that. Not that something she's done, but not something that she is. If you think about some of the stronger female leaders around the world, Margaret Thatcher, Helen Clark, Jenny Shipley here, Hillary Clinton to a way, in many ways they have, either by nature or nurture, been as tough, if not tougher, than the men around them. Jacinda has never backed away from being what she is, which is a young mum, a young woman, in this position of power. And a lot of the blowback has been about that. We saw a bit of that in Australia with Julia Gillard as well, I believe. That's sort of a feeling I got there as well.
Yeah, you're right on the money there. And again, there's actually research about this. It's called the double bind. So when women are in leadership, if they behave in a more masculinized fashion, and so Shipley, Clark, Thatcher, definitely more masculinist in their style, they will get respect as a leader, but people will say they're not a nice woman. Yeah. On the other hand, if you're a woman leader and you behave according to feminized norms of being a nice person, being caring, being courteous, always being respectful, people say, well, nice person, but not leaderful. And so, any woman in leadership is trying to navigate between damned if you do and damned if you don't. Now, by my reckoning, actually, Ardern mostly plays to what the research says is the sweet spot, which is she displays behaviours that are not especially feminised nor masculised. They're kind of just, being an intelligent, sensible person is what generally in life would get you respected, right? If you're intelligent, if you're thoughtful, if you behave in a respectful manner towards other people, generally speaking, you would expect that person to be taken seriously. So, and that's mostly the zone that she plays in. But nonetheless, despite, however many times she might prove herself to people as being, a competent leader, they will find reasons because of this, not only because of party political reasons, but because there's this gendered thing that comes in. And so she will be damned more harshly than would a Labour male leader for making exactly the same decisions.
Yeah.
Not only
I love the
political thing.
I love the one you brought up early on, which is, it doesn't get mentioned very often, and it really has no reason to be. But the one that, she's actually quite a good leader, therefore she's obviously not actually a woman.
Oh.
That's just that's an amazing one. And I've seen the photoshopped pictures where apparently you can see the outline of her penis in a dress, and no.
No, it's just like when I came across that, because I'm not an expert in conspiratorialism, but actually since August, I've been having to engage more and more that research to try and understand the space, and it's just jaw-dropping.
It is amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me bring something up just to kind of echo what you're saying. It's a bit weird bringing up your article when we've got here for you to speak to, but just to echo what you've been saying, what you wrote in your article about this, and I'm intrigued about this when it comes to like the political world. You say in your article, research shows both men and women with more traditional views desire, quote, tough, quote, bold, and, quote, authoritative leadership. A man displaying traditional masculine behaviours who is assertive, risk taker, dominating and commanding others is their ideal leader. This aligns with an assumption that women should follow, not lead. Sort of what you've been talking about, but even though we've been talking about it, I think that's a nice little synopsized summary of it. It makes me think as well, I mean, Jenny Shipley was a leader of our Conservative/National Party. I mean, what are the hopes for having a female leader in that world? I mean, it didn't work with Judith Collins. I mean, many might say that she was a fairly sort of masculine female. Certainly not in the feminine kind of vein of Jacinda Ardern. But also, I wanted to ask this. This is a second question, and I'll ask you both this. The Greens' policy to kind of end that dual leadership where there no longer has to be a man in leadership, there has to be a female, and then the role is open for other. Do either of you guys think that's therefore going to harm their chances for getting better representation, seeing whether we like it or not, that male leadership seems to be something that people gravitate towards, although acknowledged obviously straight away the Green voters are not the traditional Conservative type voters?
Yeah, I mean, I think there clearly is a generational shift going on. So, that desire for kind of an authoritative, masculinized thing is something more strongly associated with people of an older generation, and it's not necessarily what young people are looking for. And to the extent that the Greens generally are playing to, more strongly to a younger voter base, it might not kick back on them, but it will potentially mean that if they're trying to, tag boomers, that might be seen as a weakness. But I mean, I think, all of this is very much up in the balance, right? Because, conservative forces at the extreme are actually pushing back very, very strongly and having more influence, largely, I think, through these conspiratorial circles, because, a lot of them are, if you take Hannah Spears from Counterspin, for example, I mean, she's actively advocating that women can only be happy if we're back in the kitchen, barefoot and pregnant. And it's like, screw that. Honestly, that's what she is trying to argue. And they're trying to, put all of the kind of the ills of contemporary society down to a failure to uphold traditional, male and female roles, within the family and within society. So, none of the, progress is not certain. I think we have to be, very clear that if we believe in a serious way about equality of opportunity, that this is still all up for debate. We're seeing abortion rights being eroded radically in the US. Those same forces are at play here in our country. I mean, that's where some of the money for these people is coming from. That's a well-known fact.
And I think actually, Pat, be careful what you wish for in some ways. I was trying to think while that conversation was on about strong female right-wing leaders. And France, of course, which has quite a long history of admiring strong women, is the only place I can think of. And they have Marine Le Pen, and she's frankly terrifying.
Yeah.
So, and that's got nothing to do with her gender. That's all to do with her politics. So, no.
Yeah. I mean, the people are... There's generally an association between a perception of crisis or living in a time of crisis and this desire for strong leadership, in the sense of essentially a fantasy that there will be someone who has such insight into the problems that we face that they just need to issue decrees that the rest of us then just kind of blindly follow, and all our problems will go away. And it really is a fantasy. It's a deluded fantasy. Such a person does not exist. The problems that we face require collective effort to be resolved. There isn't kind of a handful of people in the world who've got all the answers, and the rest of us just have to find them and say, tell us what to do. So, there's a bunch of people who can't cope with that. They're still looking for mum or dad really, to tell them what to do. And a bunch of the rest of us are saying, no, actually, we're happy to be in a more adult-to-adult conversation where we accept that things are messy and complicated and we have to negotiate our way through this stuff, and that some of us, some of the pressure of or some of the responsibility for solving problems has to sit on us. It can't just sit, on the top table. So that's all playing out as well.
All right, Dr. Suze Wilson from Massey University, the School of Management. Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you giving us some time. Lovely to have you from Australia, so we could so you could take the late shift. That was very good of you. And I appreciate your insights, and love to have you back again sometime soon.
Thanks very much. Good to talk to you guys.
All the best. Right, let's have a look at a couple of messages that have been coming in. Anthropologist out there says transphobia and anti-female leadership are intimately linked to keeping women small. No matter what steps are taken, they are wrong because they challenge the rules of patriarchy as normative. Kim says, I agree, anthropologist. I also think this is why there is so much pro-life agenda in the States. Yeah, fascinating. George, you want to add anything to that, seeing you're in the background kind of watching and doing stuff from back there?
No. I think one thing I'd be interested in, I guess, is how leadership as a concept is constructed as already masculine, right? It's already seen as innately masculine, and so therefore there's this sort of impossible reconciliation, or there's this impossible task that women leaders have to face, and Dr. Wilson sort of mentioned this, that they have to be leaders, but leaders, the concept of leader has been constructed as already always already male and masculine.
Yeah, I think that dilemma she mentioned is fascinating, because I mean I see that in good for you, Kim. You see that everywhere. I mean I've seen that over the 20 plus years that I've been performing in pubs. I used to see that all the time when you had a pub owner who was a woman. And, 9 times out of 10, they would be some of the hardest negotiators, some of the most hard-edged people that you'd ever deal with in the business. And partially because, they just had to be, because people would just, they were already on the back foot because people were expecting them to be a bloke, So yeah, it's a tough one for me to argue because, like I said, I know our Prime Minister, and I think she's been doing a fantastic job. So yeah.
Hey, we might wrap up, guys, really quickly. This is not going to be a last long piece, but speaking of the Prime Minister, she did do a cabinet reshuffle today, and I'm sure people are up to date with what has been going on some levels. But let's just have a quick look at what happened today with the cabinet, the comings, the goings. And we might have 1 or 2 quick minutes to chat about it after that. Have a listen.
From strumming on stage to stumbling on the severe nursing shortage.
We're happy with the position that we're in now.
The last 3 years have seen Chris Farfoy tumble from rising star in the Labour cabinet to reluctant minister. He asked Jacinda Ardern last year if he could bail. She asked him to stick it out for another year.
His contribution as a minister has been hugely valuable. He goes with the love and thanks of his colleagues for his contribution over many years, and he will be greatly missed.
It comes after Newshub revealed yesterday that health sector leaders were not consulted on immigration policy to address the dire nursing shortage, despite Farfoy saying they were. Farfoy's portfolios will be divvied up between Kiritapu Allen, who gets justice, Michael Wood with immigration, and Willie Jackson with broadcasting.
It's an honour, and it's something I always wanted to do.
The increasingly under fire Portal Williams has lost her police portfolio to Labour's Mr Fix-It Chris Hipkins. Her struggle to deal with rising gang tensions and violence proving too much of a distraction.
Minister Williams and I sat down.
I think that's unfair. We can talk about this more at the end briefly, but we've talked about this before here. I think this is, unfortunately for Portal Williams, probably a political decision. I guess they're all technically political decisions, but we've said it before. How do you stop a gang warfare going at one another? How do you stop teenagers grabbing a car and driving it into a shop? It seems like, and the article. In fact, we don't need to watch any more of it. That'll do us now, because I'm just going to now say what the thing says. The piece goes on to talk about Nationals claiming that they got scalped, and I think they probably did. I think Portal Williams was probably a scalp that National got from making enough noise about it, because whether she was capable or incapable of doing that job, ram raids and gang tension are not things that she has a lot of control over that warrants losing the job. Now, there might have been other reasons behind it as well, but because that's what National was calling for a couple of weeks ago, or even last week, I think they can rightfully claim a scalp in that situation. But yeah, cabinet reshuffle, much of a muchness. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I thought. Oh, sorry, George. I thought both of the profiles in there were a little unfair. I mean, I think Chris Farfoy, he's had a couple of stumble moments, as every minister always will. But I mean, there's a man who absolutely, literally, is stepping back to spend more time with his family. That is his reason for leaving. He's timed his departure to be there on his son's 5th birthday. I think there's a couple of rising stars who are. I think Kiritapu Allen is a real force to be reckoned with. I think she's going to be terrific going forward. And there's one that doesn't get mentioned in there, I don't think, but Kieran McNulty, who's there he is, and actually on the left of screen there. Yeah. I think he's the guy who I think is going to be front and center on the Three Waters debate going forward. He's now local government, associate minister of local government, and he's the rarest beast of all, really, which is a truly rural Labour MP. I mean, they really haven't had one of those since Damien O'Connor first arrived on the scene. So, yeah, I think there's some interesting. I think the big moves are all reasonably predictable. I agree with you about Portal Williams, and I also agree that Chris Hipkins is Labour's Mr. Fix-It. He's he's incredibly competent and very good at managing both the media and the people he works with. But some of the smaller moves are kind of interesting to me. I mean, you can sort of see the next generation of the Labour Party beginning to come through now, which was not necessarily the case for quite a long time.
If you want to jump in, George, that's cool. But before you do, actually, I think we'll play this bit. And this is from News Hub. Interesting to hear the reporter on News Hub. And I'm not suggesting there's a bias here at all, but actually we've been complaining, Jeremy, and I'm sure you've been involved with this, about kind of meaningful conversations and digging a bit deeper and saying out there to the media, ask the questions and get the information and give us that. Don't just let these politicians say whatever they want. And the reporter here makes a really good point about what's being said versus what's the truth when things come up like teenage crime statistics. So I will play this last kind of 30 seconds just for us to hear.
Well, Sam, a reshuffle was always on the cards pre-election, but it's hard not to see this one as a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to a few weeks of bad headlines. For example, the National Party has been putting the pressure on over gangs, but there's not much the police minister can do about a long-standing feud between the tribesmen and the killer bees. Before that, the headlines was ram raids, the National Party pointing to youth crime and saying that shows that it's on the rise, but the stats actually show that youth crime is trending down. So it may be that Williams is the first real casualty in Auckland's gang warfare.
So I actually found that quite refreshing, to have a journalist forget who it was and what they were saying, actually saying this is what National's saying, this is the truth, because so much we've been getting so far is this is what National's saying. Right, on to our next topic, you know what I mean? So I applaud them for that. It was a nice piece, and as we always say, if we've got something to criticise, we will, but if we've got something to kind of highlight because we like it and we're impressed by it, we're going to do that as well.
Great. No, I agree.
Couple of messages that have come in. As I predicted after Parliament protest review, Mallard left early. They're just looking for a diplomatic post for him. Yep. And God, look who's in the chat. So we can't get away from us. Old Chewy. Chewy's in the chat. Unfair to think the Minister for Police can solve it. Are we allowed to read Chewy's messages out? Is this against the rules or something that we're doing right now? I don't know. Unfair to think the Minister for Police can point at things to solve in the short term at an operational level. Yes. I agree with that wholeheartedly. We didn't that one. I didn't mean to press that one actually. One more from Carl. Police and justice is always a hard gig for a left-wing government that will try to look at the root cause of gangs rather than the superficial stuff the National Party will look at. Yeah, and I think that's fair as well. The left will often go, well, how do we change this intergenerationally? And the right will go, how do we change this tomorrow? We change this tomorrow by throwing all the bad people in prison. The left goes, we change this intergenerationally by looking at the root causes when people are 2, not when they're criminals when they're 22.
Yep. No, again, it goes back to what we were talking about right at the start of the show, which is, there are some fundamental beliefs that the right wing are better at the economy and justice and military, and the left wing are better at social issues, and that stuff just isn't true anymore. But it's a really hard hurdle to get over.
Yeah. All right, let's just remind you guys again, and thank you very much if you've already subscribed, but you can, while you're watching us, if you're watching on your phone or you've got your phone handy, pick it up right now and go to Apple Podcasts or go to Spotify and either follow us on Spotify or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And while you're on Apple Podcasts, even though this will be our first daily audio content to go out will be tonight, there are 3 episodes there already, so you're more than welcome to rate and review us as well. I'm sure you'll give us a lovely 5-star to help us with the Apple algorithm. But every day after the show is finished, we will be uploading the audio from the show, and that will be available probably within a half hour. So if you missed the start of the show, when you get up tomorrow morning to go to work, listen to it on Apple Podcasts as you're driving to work, and we will start to do that. And we're going to start to introduce some more things along the way. We kind of don't have a website right now. We don't have a Facebook page. We'll start to bring those in as we get more of those super chats. Just kidding. But I'm not. But I am. So anyway, hey, Jeremy, thank you for joining us today. Very, very cool to have you back. Good to see you back from back rearing to go and fighting fit from COVID. George, as always, have an awesome birthday. It's your birthday for about another 51 minutes. And then guess what? And then it's my birthday.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. So my birthday in 51 minutes.
I'm feeling left out.
Finished. Yeah. Well,
I'm going to sit here and wait till November.
It's a game of twos.
Yeah.
I mean, you two have had COVID. I haven't. Me and George have having birthdays. Jeremy, you haven't. I've got a dog. I don't know. All right, guys. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate all your time, your effort for coming along. Thank you for watching us. Remember, hashtag share our shit. The daily audio podcast, share that around as well. Let people know what's going on. And yeah, rate and review us there. Subscribe to us on YouTube as well would be great. And other than that, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to us. So if you've listened to this first podcast, which is the first daily podcast we've got, make sure you send us a note or a message. Tell us that you have. And other than that, we will see you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. with Penny Ashton and a couple more guests to talk the big, hairy news stories of the day. All right, team. Thanks very much. Hooroo.
Cheers, guys.